Ooh.
What's up, everyone? Trevor Matthews here from Refrigeration Mentor, and we are live right now with Gary McCreadie of HVAC Know It All. And tonight we're going to be talking about the basics of refrigeration and HVAC. I'm super excited. And we're just going to share the screen here. So I do have my Instagram live going at the same time because I don't think we'll be. I only got 100 seats, and I don't think everyone will be able to fit. So if you can't fit, well then. You're going to jump on Instagram Live. Can you see this, Gary?
I can see. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. How you doing, Gary?
Good, man. How are you?
Oh, man, I'm doing awesome. Congratulations on the new role. Why don't you tell everyone what's going on with you?
Yeah, well, it's been 9 months in the works in the planning stages. I launched McCreadie HVAC and Refrigeration Services this week on actually today's what, Tuesday?
Woo!
Yeah, today's Tuesday, yesterday. So it's been a busy 9 months working, trying to launch a business, doing the HVAC know it all thing, and it's been awesome though. It's all about the, what do they say? What's the saying? It's not about the destination, it's about the journey, and
Yeah.
the journey is the awesome part. So very cool. Thanks, Trevor, for bringing that up, by the way.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. Congratulations. That is wicked.
Thank you.
We got a jam-packed of content tonight. Hopefully, if you guys can, and girls and whoever's out there, if you can use the chat box, raise your hand. If you want to unmute and say, hey, what's up, and ask a question, we're more than happy for you to do that because we really want to kind of share our knowledge and want to hear from you guys, really. We want you guys to share your knowledge with everyone else. Reza, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going real good. It's going real good. What are you saying?
Oh, not much. I just recently got home.
Awesome. Okay, do you got a question?
No. Sorry, I was just saying hey.
Awesome. Yeah, use the chat. If you got a question, then you can unmute yourself. Don't mind saying hey either. It's all good. All good. Gary, let's kick it off, brother. Let's kick it
Sure.
off because we only got 58 minutes.
Let's do it.
Okay, well, welcome to the basic refrigeration and the refrigeration cycle. Tonight we're going to talk about all refrigeration. We've done this, but was it 2 months ago?
Yeah, about so, yeah.
Yeah, so about 2 months ago. So we're going to get into it again. It's going to be a similar training, but we got a lot more polling questions this time. We're also going to want you guys to ask a lot more questions. What you're seeing out in the field, what you learned, if it's basic, if it's advanced. We may not have the answer, but I bet you somebody on this call will have the answer for sure. Okay, we're going to get into some key terms. We're going to get into some definitions. We're going to get into the refrigeration cycle, which is so important. Why I really like talking about the refrigeration cycle, because it's so important to know. It's so important to know because when I was a technician in the field, I've seen it in school. I've seen the diagrams, the pH diagrams, and I was like, why do I need to know this? You know, this is for engineers, this is for designers. And now I use it in my trainings constantly. What do you think about pH diagrams and enthalpy diagrams, Gary?
Sorry, my son just came downstairs and kind of, we talked about this last time. They're awesome because you can actually use them to troubleshoot stuff out in the field. You can draw them out, and you can find out your superheat, your subcooling, and you can see them, right? But I don't use them enough in the field like I should, but we're going to talk about this tonight.
Yeah, we're going to get into some components. We're going to talk about the compressor, condenser, metering device, evaporator. There's so much. We could talk just 1 hour on a condenser, probably 2 days on a condenser. We could talk same thing on metering device, compressor. There's just so much information that's inside them that we want to share. We're going to get into a Q&A, and there will be a knowledge assessment at the end. So let's get into some key terms. We did this last time. I really like going through these. This is what it looks like an enthalpy diagram. You seen one of these before, eh, Gary?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So as you can see, we got a compressor, we got a condenser on there, we got a metering device, which is a TXV in this one, and then we have an evaporator. So what is sensible heat? What is sensible heat?
We need the audience, someone from the audience to do this one.
Yeah.
You guys know what it is.
Change in temperature without changing state.
Okay. Look at that. Bang. We got experts in here. The expert. I love it. This is a few of the spots that you would see it. You'll see it on your suction line, your discharge line, your liquid line, all these different places that you can use it. And it's so important to take temperature. It took me many, many years to start troubleshooting by temperature. I always use pressure, but it's so important to learn how to troubleshoot using temperature. What do you think about that, Gary?
That is so important. And let's take air conditioning, for example. How many different refrigerants are there for air conditioning now? There's a bunch of drop-ins for R22, there's 407C, there's 410A. They all might run at varying pressures, but your saturation temperatures, condensing, evaporative, saturated temperature, they're all going to be pretty constant. So it's very important to look at temperatures, saturated temperatures on your gauges rather than pressures. Because like if you're on the phone with a journeyman and you say, what should my pressures be? Well, what refrigerant are you using? If you say, what should my temperatures be? It's the same across the board. If we're talking about the same application, air conditioning, for example, like I said.
Yeah, no, exactly. Anybody else want to add to that?
On 422B, have you guys ever used that refrigerant before?
I don't believe I've used that one. I've only used a couple of drop-ins, to be honest with you. 424A, I think it is. And I've used the blue on refrigerant. I haven't used many drop-ins for R22.
Yeah, it's I don't know what it is up there, but down here it's new 22 and it's 422B.
Yeah.
The
I've heard of
glide
it.
is nice, but I started up a Dinosaur and my suction pressure was perfect, but my head pressure went through the roof.
You're talking pressures again.
Yeah, pressures.
we were just saying talk temperature because it's easier to understand, right?
Okay, and then so if I can bring up my scale, because obviously you tell me to download these awesome apps and I get these apps. So like if I look at the PT chart, I'm looking at a 325. It's a 137, 138 temperature on head.
What's
But-
ambient now?
Ambient was 70 degrees
So,
and my suction pressure was like 56 PSI.
temperature again, right? So,
Yeah,
so
I know, I'm sorry, but
no, don't be sorry. I did the same thing for many years. It's just now, like Carrie said, there's so many different refrigerants out there, like so many. One thing
Yeah,
about these new refrigerants too, you need to make sure with the compressor manufacturer if they're allowed to go in. I've seen it many times where an OEM of a piece of equipment says, yes, this is okay in our equipment, but the compressor manufacturer does not approve it. So be aware of that out there. Be
No,
aware.
it was a brand new install on a semi-hermetic compressor, and it actually had a label on it that said fitted for new 22. But we dialed in perfectly, pulled a great vacuum, and then whenever we started charging it, we ended up using about 70 pounds of gas because it was a huge condenser, and we were looking at, it was a 40-degree evaporator and about 134-degree condenser. It just seems like the glide was just way off the charts.
Yeah, it's hard to say that. That's if it's 70 out and you're getting 138, that's like nearly 70 degrees. 68 degrees. That's a huge amount. There's no TDs that are usually that amount.
I know that the only thing that I can think of is that, we walked into this place blind. The only thing I can think of is that the condenser coil is just completely plugged. We really couldn't see much. It's one of those standards, old style McQuay units that you have the side lifts, and then you also have the bottom. of the condenser coil.
So was the fan right? Was it the right RPM? Were you getting the proper airflow? There's so many things that you need to look. Is you
The
didn't
other-
check
the
if it was
other-
plugged or not?
The other thing too is like I know that you probably want to move on, Trevor, but I'll just say this real quick. It could be non-condensables. You said you pulled a vacuum, but I've pulled really good vacuums on systems that had I guess head pressure controls like an OR-OA valve, which basically floods back the condenser. And if you've got a solenoid valve in between and you don't open the solenoid valve, any air that is trapped, you'll have air trapped basically between the solenoid valve and the head pressure control valve. And if you don't energize that solenoid, it's trapped in there when you start it up. You have non-condensables in the system. I don't know if you've got that there, but just keep in mind that's a thing that you need to watch for when you're pulling a vacuum on a brand new system or a system that's been up and running even still.
Yeah.
We pulled out one of those earth magnets, and we opened up the solenoid by the magnet.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys ever done that before.
Yep. All the time.
Yeah, so
so-
we did that.
Well, it's one thing. So all you can do is make sure that condenser's clean, make sure it's the right fan motor, it's the right speed, you're getting the right airflow. If you know the manufacturer of that condenser, you can reach out to them, find out what the TD is supposed to be if it's not on the label. And then what you need to do is really pull the gas. There's either you're not getting enough airflow through, you have too much gas in there, but then your suction should be a lot higher, but I don't know what your temperature, what your suction is. So, maybe that's what you got to do. Pull the gas again and then start from scratch and then make sure there's no air in that system, because Gary's right. It could be non-condensables as well.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a great point to talk about, that temperature is very important. But I would also double check to see if that is approved with whatever compressor you're using it for. Even though there's a sticker on the compressor, did that sticker come from the compressor manufacturer or from the OEM? Just be aware of that.
It looked like it looked like it was nameplate.
Oh, well then you should be okay. Should be okay with that anyway. Latent heat. What is latent heat?
Latent heat would be the heat, essentially the unsensible heat, the heat that is from kinetic motion.
What do you think, Gary?
I've never heard it described that way before. I just know latent heat is basically the heat that causes a change of state, like from water to a vapor or something, like, you know what I mean? You can elaborate, Trevor.
Yeah, it changes the state, but doesn't change pressure.
Phase change.
Phase change. Yeah, 100%. And there's energy in that. It's really energy.
Yeah, what my teacher said is basically you look at a boiling pot of water. So you have your radiant heat is your heat coming up from your burner. Your latent heat is the steam coming up from the boiling water, and then your radiant or sensible heat is the boiling water temperature.
Yeah. Any energy absorbed or released by a change of physical state. That's really what it is. Exactly. And this is important to know because a lot of people don't understand latent heat and how vital it is to refrigeration and HVAC equipment, because there's a lot of BTUs in that when it does that state change. And where does that happen? Where does the latent heat and those changes happen in the system? Did it happen in the liquid line?
In your coils.
In your coils, which is very important. And now you need to understand where it's happening in your coils as well, if that makes sense. Because what happens if you don't have enough refrigerant in that coil? You're going to be starving.
Freeze.
Right? And then, well, then you do get latent heat if you got a flooded coil. But it's important to know this stuff and know that there's energy in those latent heat. And it's in the condenser and evaporator, just like you said. Saturated conditions. What's the saturated conditions?
Goes back to what we talked about, looking at your gauges in the saturated condition rather than the pressure. Saturated is another word for anyone.
From what I remember, saturated is when something is saturated, it holds the most amount of water that it can hold.
Saturated state is when both liquid and gas are existing in the same space.
Yep, exactly. When you have both liquid and gas, and you get to that point, where would you get to that point? Where do you need to see that all the time? Once again, should I be seeing that in the liquid line?
No.
Holes.
No. What would that be called if I get that in the liquid line? Does anybody know the term? If I have a saturated condition in the liquid line?
Blood back? No.
Go ahead, Nick.
Would that be flash gassing?
100% flash gas. Is that anything to think of that? And we'll get into it more, but if you have flash gas in the liquid line, what would cause that? What causes flash gas in the liquid line?
Possible restriction in a filter dryer.
Yeah, for sure. And then what's the test then? If you don't see it, because sometimes you can see it, right? I think that was
And take a
Matt.
temperature difference across your filter dryer there, Trev.
Yeah, 100%. This is why
Anything
temperatures
more
once again-
than, was it anything more than 3 degrees Fahrenheit difference across the dryer? It's plugged.
Yeah.
That's,
Everyone has.
everyone's got different I guess everyone tackles that differently. Like Jamie Kitchen from Danfoss says basically you shouldn't have any at all.
Yeah.
Anything more than 0 is restricted, and he's
Yeah.
kind of right. But there, you gotta judge it at some point. 2-3 degrees, you're getting up there. It might be time to swap that thing out.
Yeah. Because when you're doing that, when that restriction is happening and you get 2 or 3 degrees, it's starting to restrict. But what else is it doing? What's happening after the liquid line filter dryer? Potentially.
Your coil's starving.
It's going to potentially start to starve a little bit. And then your customer is going to feel it. And then you're going to get a call. So if you're there doing a maintenance and this is what you see, you put your temperature probes. This is something you need to mark down right away. And this is a follow-up call. This is where good technicians separate themselves from technicians that are just average. Because they'll write this stuff down and just say they can't get it to that day. Then that's a follow-up call. So when the times, if you have 2 degrees and okay, I'm not changing on this one, you write that in your service order, say the next time I come here, I need to replace this because you're going to have a bigger problem down the road if you don't. That makes sense?
A lot of times it just takes you one hand on either side. A lot of times you can feel it with your hands if the temperature difference is great enough. If it's 2 degrees, maybe not. But if you take your hands and do this across the dryer, a lot of times you can feel that difference just as a starting point.
Yeah. Always use your tools too.
Yeah.
First-
Yeah. Obviously. Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to remember the line size length is going to come into play on how much to allow for temp drop across that too, right? If you got 100-foot line set, like Gary says, you don't want to see any temperature drop.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So system design comes into play too. System design. And this is what I've been talking about with so many technicians lately with all my trainings is about we as technicians really need to understand design, system design, and how systems are piped, where you put the components is so important. And that could be a situation there. So yeah, as you can see inside this thumb curve is where all the saturated condition on an enthalpy diagram. And like Donald said, it's when you have two, both liquid and gas together, saturated condition. Superheat. Superheat's super important. Anyone wants to take a crack at it? I like that.
Above saturation.
Yeah. Temperature above saturated. Why is superheat so important? And why do we even have superheat?
To prevent the compressor from flooding.
Yeah, that's it. That's the whole purpose of a TX valve. Really is to make sure that we're not flooding back or getting liquid back to the compressor. which is so important to understand. Where do you check superheat?
You can check it in 2 different places if that's a hint.
Outlet of the evaporator and at the compressor.
Yeah.
Vapor pressure and vapor line temperature.
And one thing that's super important to understand, that lots of people use different terms for compressor superheat, because it could be total superheat they're talking about, could be compressor superheat, it could be back pressure superheat, some people say. So you want to understand, there's lots of people use different terms. I use compressor superheat. You just want to make sure that you have some. And even if you have some, I work and I talk with Bitzer a lot, and I do some trainings with them. They use something called discharge superheat. And they do use it a lot on their screw compressors, but they also talk about it heavily on their semi-hermetics. Because if your discharge temperature is too low, you could still have wet gas, even though there is superheat. Now, Copeland does not state that or say that that is something, because when I work with Copeland, I've asked them about it. They don't talk about discharge superheat, but Bitzer definitely talks about it a lot. And it's anybody ever encountered that?
I've
No, I know. Go ahead.
so I don't know who was talking there. Go ahead.
No, I normally use subcooling. Normally the stuff that I work on, I'm non-TXV. And I know TXV is normally superheat.
You can find out kind of if a system has a problem. If you take your discharge line temperature, you can find out if there's some stuff going on as well, because as your discharge line starts to rise, there could be potential other problems in the system. You could be short of refrigerant. You could have a dirty condenser coil. You just take that one reading there, and if it's higher than normal, then you can go and start looking at why do I have so much heat in my discharge line?
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a good thing to start checking and comparing as you go. It really does help.
Yeah, 100%. And you need to be taking so many different checkpoints, temperature and pressure points around the system. And I've seen this time, even with myself, when I was first starting out in the field, like 4 or 5 years in, I did not take enough temperature and pressures around the system. I'll be honest with you. Because
Going to Trevor's point about looking at compressor discharge or compressor discharge superheat, that's one standard measure that we're doing on all our Aeon startups, whether it's on larger units with Bitzer compressors. Most standard ones we come across are Copeland compressors, and recently Danfoss VFD compressors as well. And like what Gary was saying, it gives you invaluable information on the temperature side, because you know if you're going to be running hot, potentially close to the carbonization point of oil, you're going to start breaking it down.
Exactly. I love it.
That's why he's the, yeah. I was about to say that. You took the words right out of my mouth, Trevor.
I love it. This guy knows what he's talking about.
Another point to add to this. I'm with Daikin, and so when we talk about inverter-driven product, discharge temperature is a component in the algorithm that manages the inverter. In fact, when I teach the classes, you can actually charge a Daikin inverter system just by discharge superheat.
That's
wow.
Cool. That's very
Hey,
cool.
Bob, why don't you explain? I love this. Why don't you explain how to check that, Bob?
Yes, please, because I have a lot of Daikin units that we just inherited.
And also too, Bob, while you're explaining that, can you identify what the target superheat is? I guess let's say it's a standard ambient 75 degree or 80 degree or something like that out. That'd be kind of cool to know.
Okay, so when we're talking about VRV systems, even down to your ductless mini split product, there is not a set target. So what's unique about our inverters, and this is not just Daikin. I was with Lennox. I've worked with Medea under the Lennox flag. These inverters have moving targets, multiple moving targets. It's constantly watching everything at the same time. Discharge superheat can certainly pop up a red flag in the thermostat or the control mechanism, but it is a controlling influence in managing the speed, the position of the EEVs, whether they are, well, if it's a heat pump, outdoor EEV, indoor EEV, and cooling. So it's hard to give you a target. We all know that it's pretty much at the 220 degree mark, 220 Fahrenheit, you're in the danger zone. And that's going to be OEM specific. You want to find out what kind of oils you're dealing with. Some of these oils, especially with the new A2L refrigerants, some of these oils are going to be different, and they're going to have a little higher temperature capability. So you want to keep in close contact with your OEM on this kind of thing. But that value, that discharge superheat, is an effective troubleshooting and maintenance feature. I like the idea of you guys documenting it and watching it drift as you come back visit to visit. It's important to have history on these things, and that's kind of the magic of it.
Cool.
So when you have it at 220 and it starts to go above that, what the issues can happen?
Well, you start to see your oil breakdown. You're approaching the danger zone for the internal overload. So your core temperatures start to go up. In the VRV world, that inverter, once that temperature comes up high enough, it's going to look at, well, these systems have 7 thermistors on them. And they will start to send information back to start to slow the compressor down, watch the indoor coil temperature and cooling, and just start managing things. I was just down in Yuma, Arizona. I cover Arizona and New Mexico for Daikin. And we just were down there, and it ended up being a charge issue. Everybody was freaked out. They're all looking at these thermistors, but these things are critically charged. And in order to get all of those thermistors all tied in with everything within the right range, HVAC side of it, you got to have the right airflow, and then you're going to end up with the right charge. And based on weighing it in, I'm not going to tell you to do it any other way. You can't do it by subcooling, not on an inverter system. You've got to weigh the refrigerant in. There's just too many pieces, too many things at play, too many moving targets to try and manage it any other way.
Yeah, and one thing I like about that, and technicians that I've dealt with that install those, they size the line sets and they know exactly how many pounds of refrigerant need to go in that system. Super cool. We need more technicians to be able to do that, be able to size the line size it, and then add, if it's 40 pounds, 100 pounds, 300 pounds, right? Depending on the system. But there is, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Sorry, if I can just say one thing, that I spent a lot of time last summer, the summer before, trying to educate customers on this, because in my location, we've got, despite the fact that we have to track every last ounce of refrigerant we use, we've got a real problem with guys just topping up. And they use the excuse of, well, I've never been there before. And to me, that really doesn't matter, because like was just mentioned, these are critically charged systems. So the proper thing to do is, I've never been here before. I recover all that refrigerant. I compare it to what I know should have been there based on the data. And then we start all over again. Pressure test, evacuation, recharge by weight. I mean, that's the way these, if you have any hope in hell of recovering a ductless after a leak, that's the way you got to do it.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, no, you do. That's our job. Pull the gas out if you don't know. That's a part of our job. I know it's work, but that's
Donald, that was a very passionate speech, Donald.
Okay, so here's the definition from BITS, or what they say for operating discharge temperature. Discharge temperature below 35 K. Above the SCT indicates low suction superheat conditions. Check evaporator operation. So that means even though you have superheat coming back at the inlet of the compressor, if your discharge temperature is below 35 K, above the SCT. So 35K would be 35 times 1.8 Fahrenheit to get the Fahrenheit value. That could mean even though you have 5 degrees superheat at the compressor, you could still have wet gas. Because I've heard of this before. I've been at contractors and I trained thousands of technicians, and I've been at contractors where they told me, Trevor, I had superheat on my compressor, and these were Liebert units. I had superheat at the compressors. I tore them down. I lost 3 of them. They were flood back damage. Bearing damage, main bearing damage. And main bearing damage on semi-hermetics is due to flood back or liquid dilution. So I started putting 2 together. That was a couple of years ago. And they told me go superheat. So I went back to Emerson and I talked to, Copeland, talked with the gurus, and they're like, there's no such thing as go superheat. That's what they told me. But now when I talk with Bitzer, it's kind of making sense to me. It's not that it's flood back, but it's your discharge temperature's too low and it's causing wet gas in the compressor. Look it up.
Yeah.
Look it up.
I've actually overcharged back in the day when I'm learning, overcharged systems, and the compressor gets cold to the touch. In the discharge line, you can actually put your hand on it and hold it. Like a discharge line, you shouldn't be able to hold a discharge line. But if you overcharge a compressor and you don't have enough superheat, basically that compressor, a scroll compressor, it's going to fill up with liquid. The body of it actually gets cold to the touch, and it can actually start sweating. And the discharge line, literally, I could sit there and hold it like this. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so awesome. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that.
Hey,
Dewpoint.
if possible, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, I was always taught that obviously for standard efficiency, you're 30 over ambient on your condensing temperature, and I was taught that your discharge line should be roughly 100 over that. So a general rule of thumb would be whatever your ambient is, 30 over that plus 100 on top of that. Is that correct or is that incorrect?
No, that's not correct.
Okay.
No.
The 30 over ambient rule is like because as the SEER rating increases, that number starts to drop big time. Like it can drop to 20, it can drop to 15, it can drop to 10. As that the efficiency of the equipment gets better. Because I was taught that back in the day, that you should be 30 degrees above ambient, but it's not. Nowadays with the efficiency of equipment, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you need to reach out to the manufacturer and find out from them. And I was taught, just like Gary, so many rules of thumb. Oh, the evaporator superheat needs to be this, and the discharge condensing SCT should be this, and the TD should be this. You need to find out from those manufacturers. You go to Daikin, they're going to tell you this is what it should be for this unit. You go to Keep Right, you go to Ref Plus, you go to Heatcraft, it doesn't matter who they are. They're going to tell you for those condensers, those evaporators, what the superheat should be, what the TD should be, even the Delta T, some of them will give you. You know what I mean? So I don't go with rules of thumb anymore unless it's the last thing I have to do, right? Maybe to get it in the range, because 10 degrees superheat right now, if we talk about superheat on a coil, 10 degrees superheat would work, 8 degrees may, 12. You know, you may satisfy that room, but is that the most efficient? Because the coils are designed on a specific superheat for a specific application. So even though it works at 10 degrees, because the rule of thumb I used to get was low temp, 4 degrees, medium temp, 8 degrees, high temp, 12 degrees, something in that range. But maybe it's 8 degrees. Run that coil the most efficient. 12 degrees will still work, but you're going to run that system longer. And then if you get humidity and dehumidification in there, you may change it depending on that application a little bit.
I was just on a freezer call a few weeks ago, plasma freezer, minus 35 degrees Celsius. The superheat at the compressor was around 35 to 40 degrees, and that was normal. So you can't always go by rules of thumb.
Yeah, a supermarket. I was running 40, 45 all the time because you got 100, 200 foot, 300 foot.
That's right.
Run
You have a long
back.
pipe run, and with low temp refrigeration, you don't have a lot of gas. Your volume of gas coming back is very little. That's why low temp refrigeration has cooling on their compressors, like vapor injection and whatnot.
Yeah, vapor injection, head coolant fans, water jackets, so many different things. And you're going to see this on heat pumps because they're trying to get more and more out of heat pumps. They're trying to get more heat, so you're gonna start seeing injection on heat pumps. Dewpoint. Let's get to Dewpoint. What is it? Because this is important to know. This is something I didn't know, and it's so important with Glide refrigerant. We'll talk about Glide soon.
It's moisture in the air.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you for muting yourself. I appreciate that.
I think we're talking about this in the sense of refrigerant, right, Trevor?
Yes.
Dewpoint. Okay.
Yeah.
And someone said last time Superheat, if that's going to help.
Yeah.
I know that dew point is used for Glide refrigerants that have, you go off the dew point to get your superheat, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Love that. That's the most important thing you need to know. The most important thing you need to know is that you need to get your superheat using the dew point, because refrigerants now, like Gary said earlier, there is a ton of refrigerants out there, and they're all blends. And they have so much glide, up to 20 degrees glide on some of them. Can you imagine? Now, I would work with a lot of manufacturers, and they're like, Trevor, do you know how hard it is to design an evaporator for 15 degrees TD and the glide in the refrigerant's 20 degrees? It's wild. So it is the vapor state of the refrigerant, and you use this point to measure superheat. And on the chart, this is where you would see. So those are you that see this. This is the dew point where the compressor is. Vapor into the suction, vapor out of the discharge. So important. So important to understand. Anything you want to add, Gary?
No, I think that, yeah, this drawing and what you just said covers it.
Yeah.
It's like the very first point and last point, like when it sees from vapor to liquid, right? Like the first drop.
Right? Yeah, going from vapor, you hit in your condenser, you hit your condensing point, and that's really when it starts to drop out of the gas. But it's still vapor. The dew point's the vapor point. So what you see on the chart here, let me go back. This is the dew point line. When you cross this line, now you get into that saturated condition in that refrigerant, where you're going into your condenser, because that line leaving the hottest point of a system is right at the valve, or right at the scroll set, or right when the last squish of gas is done. That's the hottest point inside the compressor. From there, it's all de-superheated gas, so it's cooling down the discharge line, and then it gets in, and then you hit your dew point, where now you're starting to get droplets out of it.
So just to clarify, the area on the upper part of your chart between the two red dots is your condenser, and on the lower part between the two red dots is your evaporator.
Yeah. When we talk about an HFC system, if we got into CO2 refrigeration, we could dive in a little deeper on this chart. But yes, you're 100% right, Donald. Sorry about that. Okay, subcooling. This is something super important. I know you guys know subcooling. It's something that you do need to take, but great on Bob saying that when you're charging a variable speed or an inverter system, that you don't charge with subcooling. You're going to use way in the charge, but subcooling on lots of systems. I checked it on so many systems.
So subcooling would be the amount of temperature that's extracted from your refrigerant past its condensing point in the condenser.
What do you think, Gary?
Yeah, anything below, I think it's best explained if we keep to the word saturation / boiling point.
Awesome.
And
I love that.
anything above saturation is superheated. Anything below saturation is subcooled.
Yep.
I think that's the easiest way to understand it. And I've done a video where I basically showed a pot of water, and in the video I said pasta, and a lot of people made fun of me because I didn't say pasta. But anyway, the pot of water basically is subcooled, and then the vapor above the water is superheated, and then kind of at the top where it's liquid and vapor at the same time is saturated. It's I don't know, you guys can go, it's on YouTube. I can't remember what the name of it's called, but anyway, back to what I was saying. Saturation point, anything above it is superheated, anything below it is subcooled.
Yeah. And this is the terms that you should be using, just like Gary said, more often, because these are the proper terms, like boiling point. We need to talk more about boiling point. Not many, I didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about it until I started working for a manufacturer and they talked about it. But
it confuses people, I think, Trevor, because they think boiling point is hot, but not necessarily. With refrigerant, you could boil at in the minuses, like minus, I think R22 is like minus 41 at atmosphere or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how we pull the heat out. And so subcooling is at the outlet of your condenser, and you want a full column of liquid, high pressure, high temperature liquid leaving your condenser. Where do you check for subcooling? That's a question. Did I just say it, Gary? I think I just said the answer.
Did you?
I might have. Where do you check for subcooling?
You asking me or are you asking the audience?
The audience.
Oh, okay. It's hard to tell sometimes.
On the liquid line out of the condenser, or even on I guess wherever you're checking your liquid pressure.
Yeah. So I think if you can, I would always take it at the outlet as well as the inlet of the metering device if you can. But if you can't, minimum, you got to take the temperature at the inlet of that metering device so you can compare. Because if you have temperature drop across that liquid line, you may have an issue. Maybe your liquid line is too small potentially.
I want to. Oh, sorry. Go on. I'm going to throw in a point. Whoever that was, go ahead first.
I'll wait till you finish.
Sorry?
I said I'll wait till you finish.
Oh, okay. I was just going to mention that, and I don't know if anybody else has seen this, but if you check, there's some rooftops out there, there's some machines out there that you can only check the high side pressure on the discharge line. There's no liquid line port for your gauges to go on. So it's really difficult to get a proper subcooling, because I've seen where the discharge line and the liquid line pressures are slightly off. There's like a deviation between them because of restriction through the system. And I've seen it where it's exactly the same on both. So just keep it in mind when you're checking subcooling and you only can check with the discharge line service port, that your subcooling might not be 100% correct, because I've seen that before. So it's always best to check right on if you have a liquid line port for your gauges, it's best to check there, not on the discharge, if you can.
Yeah. And Bob says a good thing, liquid line running through a heated space, not insulated liquid line. You know, how long? That's why it's so important to take these temperatures. So
my question is, in the colder weather, does your subcooling increase or does it decrease?
That's a really good question.
It depends how your system is set up. If your system's set up like a standard air conditioning system that has no head pressure control, no fan cycling, no fan speed, and your fan's going full tilt, your subcooling is going to be through the roof, because you're rejecting that heat, right? And then the air is cold, the ambient's cold, and it's coming in and it's rejecting a lot more than would be on a normal summer day, like 90 degrees or so outside. So yeah, your subcooling is going to be through the roof on an low ambient day if you don't have any controls to keep your head pressure up 100%.
Oh, okay, thank you.
No problem.
Bubble point. Awesome. Love these questions. We got a lot of interaction going on right now, Gary.
Yeah, this is a good one. It stepped up from you're stepping up the game from the last one. It was quiet. It was a lot of crickets on the last one.
Bubble point. This is important. We just talked about the dew point and how important that is. It's the bubble point. If the dew point's the vapor state, what do you think the bubble point is?
Yeah, the bubble point is the inverse of the dew points. So on glide refrigerants, you use your bubble point to get your subcooling.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the liquid state and you use it to check subcooling. Fantastic. And here it is on the curve. If you're looking at the screen, that's your bubble point. Now,
Excuse me, Gary and Trevor, if I could ask you a quick question regarding subcooling. So I work on refrigeration and air conditioning both, and for the contractor I'm with, and with fan cycling controls, a lot of the times you could get flashing in your sight glass. Sometimes the subcooling is all over the place. So it's always I know that you could put a jacket over the condenser to artificially bring up the temperature, bring up the saturation temperature. But is there any kind of rule of thumb for looking at subcooling with fan cycling controls?
It's a disaster, man. It's a complete disaster when you're using fan cycle. I would recommend, if you can, to use fan speed over fan cycle, just because it's a more constant pressure or temperature that you're dealing with. Like I've charged up machines that are fan cycle, and basically what I've done is I've jumped out the fan cycle control, got that fan running 100%, and just covered up the condenser with cardboard or something like that, because I find the easiest way to do it.
I've done it both. Yeah, so it's just, you got to make sure that you have to maybe manipulate it. Always, for me, I always have one fan running. So if it's a 2-fan system, you always have one running. But yeah, they can be tricky, and in winter time's always fun to set them up. But you have to head pressure controls. You have to set them up in the winter anyway. In the middle of summer, you can't set them up. Okay, I'm just gonna mute that person. Okay.
Hello.
Glide. What is glide?
The difference between your dew point and your bubble point.
Okay, that's good. Now let's get a little deeper on that.
So I'm kind of, oh, sorry, was someone else going? So kind of, I think I know. Glide would essentially be when you have more than one refrigerant and one is boiling at a different point.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the temperature difference and where the refrigerant's at in that transition of one chemical versus the other chemical and their separate changes of state.
Yeah. So this is really important to understand, because all the refrigerants you're going to start using are going to have glide in it. Even the refrigerant you're using now, like 410A, has glide in it, but it's so small. 404A, so small, glide. All these new
refrigerants with the blends, right?
Pardon?
I got now the refrigerants that are the blends.
Yes.
That have different saturation temperatures at the same pressure.
There you go. Exactly. Because the dew point is one temperature. The bubble point is another temperature at the same pressure. So if we think of R22, if you look at the drawing over here, these are heat lines, the blue line right there. So on your enthalpy diagram, they go straight across, so that temperature and pressure is the same on your dew point and your bubble point. But when you get a glide refrigerant, it's like this. It's on an angle now. So your pressure still goes across, but as you can see here on this, that it's on an angle now. So this is one temperature. On your bubble point is one temperature. On your dew point is one temperature. Right? Different temperatures, same pressure.
So the way I always understood, I've read this phrase multiple times, is that the boiling point, the difference between the boiling point of the least volatile compound and the most volatile compound or constituent or however you want to use the term. So between the boiling point of the most volatile and the least volatile, that differential is basically your glide.
Yeah. And this is the way I think of it too. Like, think of the evaporator, and you got the meter and device, and then you got the evaporator, and then you have your outlet, your suction outlet line. When it gets into through the metering device, if it's 10-degree glide, okay, you'll have minus say 20 degrees at the very inlet of that evaporator. By the time you get to the outlet, it's 30 degrees.
Come on.
That's a 10-degree glide. Because now it's important to understand what your average and midpoint is. And this is why it's important to understand pressure temperature charts. And it's really cool. Danfoss got an amazing one. You need to get the Danfoss app, the Ref Tool app, and use that. But if you're in refrigeration, when you're checking super, you're always using the dew point. But when you're setting up EPRs, suction throttling valves, you're going to want to start with the midpoint. So just remember that. And you can talk to any of the manufacturers. I've talked to them all about it. TX valve, superheat, you're using the dew point. EPRs, suction throttling valves, start with the midpoint. How do you get the midpoint, Gary?
Look at your PT
The average
chart.
or the midpoint?
Yeah,
Which
just
one?
I mean, I would just look at the PT chart and look at the glide and then pick the middle.
Yeah, there you go. You can.
Yeah.
You add the two of them together, the bubble point and the dew point, and divide by 2. Or if you know it's a 7-degree glide, then you add 3.5, or subtract 3.5 from that. But it's important to know this stuff, and I research again because I've talked about this for years, and I'm still learning it. To be honest with you, I'm still learning about it.
Yeah, we're all still learning, man. It's crazy, this trade.
This time is crazy. We're on the first slide, and we're at 8:51. Okay, TD or temperature difference. I love this. What does that mean to you? Because it means different to a lot of different people. HVAC, Jess?
Now, are you looking at delta through the coil or delta?
No,
through
no,
Ah.
no. It's not delta T. It's temperature difference. There's
Yeah.
two different things.
That's
I
a good
got
point,
you, I
though,
got you.
because a lot of people think it's delta T, right? But that's delta. What you just said there, in of a coil, out of the coil, that would be your delta. What is temperature difference?
The return and the saturation difference.
I love it. So that is one way of checking it. The return and the saturating difference.
The
So
way I was always explained it was temperature difference is the difference between two different mediums, whereas delta T is the temperature difference of a single medium, whether
Yeah.
it be air or water or anything other.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's the Wikipedia version. It's straight from it. That a boy. Yeah, it's a textbook. But there's also in refrigeration, they talk about TD as your saturated and your discharge air. So this would be for open cases. Because if you're taking return air, you could have infiltration. Because you do have a curtain there. So just think about that. Depending on the manufacturer, you want to check. They might ask you in a walk-in box, for an example, it might be your saturating and your return, or it could be your saturating and your discharge air. Okay? So this is the stuff you need to talk when you're talking about TD. You need to make sure you're talking about the right one, because you say, oh, I got a TD of 6. Well, is it from the saturating and the return or the saturating and the discharge? Make sense? Anybody else ever hear of that?
Yeah, I've actually I've replaced Dixel controllers on open beverage cases, and it was a Structural Concepts unit. I don't know if you've ever heard that brand, but they actually put the sensor in the discharge air, and if I remember right, I think they had it set for about 18 degrees discharge air, and that's actually how they were maintaining the temperature. And I got on the phone with the manufacturer, and that's what they recommended. So I have heard that before.
Yeah, so for an example, if any of you do supermarket refrigeration CDS valves, they use the discharge air temperature to modulate, to move. Gary, I see your hands up.
I just wanted to ask you, nobody mentioned about when you use fan cycling, you were talking there. And if you have a semi-hermetic, got an oil sight glass. And as that fan cycles, you can almost always see that boiling of the oil in there. Sometimes it's because the oil's rich with refrigerant and the pressure's changing. But anyhow, sometimes it's because the valve's so sluggish that it's overfeeding for a second or so. That's why I hate fan cycling.
It could be. That's definitely when I look into design, because I've definitely seen that before, and then I seen it not happen on other systems. So it's something, once again, you want to check all points at all different conditions. This is something that I didn't know, or I didn't do when I was an apprentice out there. I used to just, take some points. Okay, superheat's good. It pulled down and shut off the system is good. But I didn't check it after defrost. I didn't check it if the curtains were pulled down, things like that. When there's low load at the end of the day, when there's no customers in the store, this is on the refrigeration side, nobody opening the doors. So you need to check it through all loads. And it's no different in the HVAC world. If during the day, when you have 100 people in the room, is going to be different than when there's nobody in the room at all. So you got to make sure that you set it up for all conditions. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay. Compression ratio. Last one. We got a slide in an hour, Gary.
This might have to be a 4-parter.
I'm okay with going with an extra 30 minutes. I don't know if you can, but I'll go an extra 30 minutes.
Yeah, I'm good till 9:30.
Awesome.
Absolute discharge over absolute suction.
Nailed it, HVAC doctor. I love it. What did you say? And this is something that is crucial to understand for compressors. And it's something I didn't use and I didn't check when I was in the technician in the field. It only happened after I started working for a compressor manufacturer. And it's so important to know because a lot of compressors fail because of improper compression ratio. And everything can affect, like every component in the system can affect compression ratio. Compressors are the heart of the system, so it takes the brunt of everything. Okay? What are some of the things, if you have high compression ratio, what does it do to the compressor as well as the system? If you have a high compression ratio.
Going to overheat your compressor.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to start overheating that compressor. What else is it doing to the compressor? Not only overheating. So you're overheating the compressor. Is it doing less work or more work?
More work to pump the same amount of gas.
Yeah, way more work. Okay, and does the efficiency go up or does the efficiency go down of your system?
She's going to plummet.
Big time. How about this? Now, is it worse to have a dirty condenser or is it worse to have a plug TX screen?
Plug TX all day.
All day, why?
So your condenser, until it's 100% plugged, really will still do its job to an extent. Your screen gets plugged and you're throttling your refrigerant into your evaporator. So it's boiling too much. It's flashing too much going in. Flashes before it needs to.
Yeah, and it's easy looking at a calculation too. So if you have, Matt said it earlier, absolute discharge over absolute suction. If you have 200 absolute over 20, it's 10 to 1. If you add 20 to your condenser, you're plugged up 20 psi, that's 11 to 1. What is it if I drop 20 psi on the suction? What's the compression ratio of that? 200 to 1, right? So, okay, enough of this stuff.
You always want to keep your suction pressure up. A lot of guys focus, especially in our area out here in Phoenix. They're always panicked about the head pressure.
You got to keep
The
that
head
up.
pressure you want to watch, but keep that suction pressure up.
Oh, 100%.
When that suction pressure tanks, your compression ratio is through the roof, just like you pointed out. And there's where your problems start.
And
Yeah.
so is your oil return too, Bob, right?
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo.
And then also, not only that, if you're in a scroll compressor, they separate because they hold together on a certain pressure ratio. And now if your pressure ratio gets way out of whack, all of a sudden you go up and you have your gauges on and it's not pumping, or you got your gauges on and you're trying to pump down the compressor, and all of a sudden they start to equalize and you hear it unload and you're like, what's going on here? Because your compression ratio is way too high. Like for Copeland compressors, the air conditioning compressors are 10, 11 to 1. That's the air conditioning. So if you're ever on a 410 system and you close off the liquid line, you pump it down, pump everything into the condenser, and all of a sudden you get down to say 25 and your head's running at 400, you won't get there, but all of a sudden it stops pumping. You're like, what's going on? I'm trying to pull out all the gas and you're pumping down and it separates. And you're like, oh, did I break it? No, it's just those scrolls will unload at a certain compression ratio. And then the refrigeration scrolls are 25, 26 to 1. They're designed differently. Okay. Polling question. We're getting into a polling. Can you imagine this, Gary? We made it to a polling question. Let's launch it. There. Which of the following statements is true in reference to glide in refrigerants? Glide is only an azeotropic refrigerants. Refrigerant blends that evaporate at the same temperature. I gotta open it up. I can't remember what that. With a constant evaporator pressure. Refrigerant blends that evaporate at different temperatures within a constant evaporator pressure, or none of the above. Give another 30 seconds. So yeah, you guys are smashing it. I don't think you guys can see the results. Can you see the results, Gary?
It says no, I don't think so.
Let me share these results with everyone. So refrigerant blends that evaporate at different temperatures with constant pressure. Okay, they're zeotropic refrigerants. Let's close the polls. Keep going. So main components of a refrigeration system, there's 4, and it doesn't matter if you're working on a heat pump, you're working on a chiller, we're working on an air conditioner, you're working on packaged unit. You got 4 components, and this is the way I try to think of refrigeration. When I'm working on a system that has hundreds of valves, multiple compressors, electronic valves, I break it down into sections and into these 4 main components. What are they?
Compressor, condenser, evaporator, and metering device.
100%. 100%. And if I could draw a line through this picture, or through a picture of a compressor, condenser, metering device, and evaporator, where would the line go through? Thanks for coming, Bob. Really appreciate all the comments, questions. Does that look about right? From the compressor through the metering device, anything on the high side would be high side pressure, high side temperature. Anything on the suction side, past that metering device at the outlet, is low pressure, low temperature. Okay, I got another polling question. Good thing. Oh, was I sharing that the whole time, that polling question? I didn't pull it off, Gary?
No, I X'd it out off my screen.
Oh, good, good. So you guys can exit out. I got a lot of good questions here. Let's talk about TX valves. On a system equipped with a TX valve, when the load on the evaporator decreases, the TXV decreases the flow of refrigerant. It increases the flow of refrigerant. It will maintain the flow, the same flow of refrigerant. It'll decrease the pressure across the evaporator. No, getting lots of different answers here. Let's see, I'm gonna make you a host there so you can see this, Gary. I don't know why I didn't earlier.
This is why when I did my CFQ, it took me, I almost, I left 8 questions, probably more than 8 questions left, because these, I read them like 1,000 times before I answer them.
Yeah. But if you think about it, if your load on your evaporator starts to decrease, what happens to your suction line? Does it get warmer or does it get colder?
It's colder.
Yeah, it's getting colder, right? Because we're starting to
Yep.
decrease. So what happens to that bulb? What's happening to that TX bulb now? Is it warmer or colder?
It's colder, and
It's cold.
it's your only opening force of the valve. So as your bulb pressure decreases, your opening force decreases.
Yes. So what does that do to the refrigerant flow?
Losing your opening force, you're going to close that valve and decrease the refrigerant flow.
There you go. So anyone who said decrease the flow of refrigerant, you got it right. You gotta love this. What do you want to add about TX valves? We could do like a 6-hour conversation on TEVs.
You don't
Gary.
want to talk to me about TX valves because you know my stand. Well, a lot of guys know my stance is I've literally changed, I don't know, 10 in 22 years of being in service. Like I could count them on my 2 hands. I just think too many guys think the TX valve is the problem before they go further. A lot of times it's short of refrigerant, or there's a restriction, or something else is wrong. So I think before you condemn a TX valve, you really need to look at all aspects of the system and figure out if there's something else that could be going on in that system.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Like I changed a few in 10 years on the tools, and I changed a handful. Or I changed it, like I was changing cases and I changed them out, but not because they failed. Like they are pretty good. And I've talked to some contractors where they've seen an uptake in TX valve replacements, and they're like, "What's going on?" And technicians coming maybe from different companies, and that's what they do. They change the TX valve when they don't know what's going on. And
well, a lot of
it
times
happens
too.
a lot of time, Gary.
Yeah,
A lot of time.
they get restricted too.
Oh yeah, it could be restricted. But what happens a lot of
from carbon. Sorry, I keep cutting you off.
no. What happens is that they pull out all the gas. They pull out the TX valve. They put a new TX valve in, and they charge it up properly, and
they think they fixed it. Yeah.
But what happened? They added the gas that was lost out of there.
That's right. Yeah. And a lot of times anybody that's ever changed one who thought it was faulty, it could have been the installer that installed that system that didn't nitrogen braze, and it's just plugged full of carbon. It's not actually the valve that's the problem. If you took it out and cleaned it, it would probably be fine. It was just the installation that caused that valve to stick or to be restricted.
Yeah, 100%. You gotta heat wrap them, wet rag them, whatever you do, whatever your style is, because if you overheat them, there's some of them have gaskets inside them, the polymers or neoprene gas, I can't even remember, Teflon. And if you get them over 250, 225, depending whose valve they are, and they all say the same thing, you don't want to overheat them. And any valve you're installing, you don't want to be overheating them, because it may work that day when you leave, but that night it might stop working, or that a month later it might stop working because of it. So just be aware of that. Okay. Now we're getting into the refrigeration cycle. We made it to the refrigeration cycle, Gary. I love it. So I love this drawing. This image is out of the Danfoss Cool Selector 2. If you don't have that, I would say get it on your computer, because it has every manual of all the Danfoss components, and it gives you these nice enthalpy diagrams. It's really important to understand when a compressor starts up, what does it generate? You get power to that stator. You energize the stator. What happens at that point?
It's hot.
It gets hot. It starts to move, and then the compressor starts to pump. So this is called something heat of compression. And It's important to know that, because if you have a high return gas, suction line temperature, back pressure temperature, I don't know why I say it that way, but whatever way you say it, if you have a really high suction temperature coming back, what does that do to the discharge? Right? It's a 1-to-1 ratio. So if I get 10 degrees suction, that suction line is going through a heated space, and it gets 10 degrees warmer at the compressor, that means your discharge is going to be 10 degrees hotter. So it's important to understand. And compressors generate heat. I talked about it earlier, right when it leaves that point, that top point that you can see right here, right when it's squished, this is a scroll compressor, right when it squishes that last piece of gas, that is the hottest point. From there, everything from the discharge is what type of gas?
Compressed superheated gas.
Superheated.
Superheated? Is it superheated? So that means is it going up or down the temperature?
Post compression, it's going down in temperature, but at the point of compression, it's gaining a lot.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Right at that point of compression, it increases that temperature. But right when it leaves that discharge valve or that scroll set or rotary, whatever compressor you got, it doesn't matter. When it leaves, it starts to de-superheat. The gas starts to cool down from that hottest point. And when Gary said it earlier, discharge temperature is probably one of the most important checks to do. Anything you want to add to there, Gary?
Yeah. No, I agree with you that once it leaves it's still superheated vapor, but it's starting to de-superheat. It's starting to lose. It's starting to lose heat as it starts to move away from the compressor.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for clarifying that. So we get to this point on the enthalpy diagram. What is this point again? You can shoot it in the chat if you want. What's happening right at this point?
Is that the saturation point?
Yeah, and there's a term that's going to go into the saturation point, but we're not at the saturation point yet.
Dew point.
Dew point, exactly. This is where we start to get little droplets of liquid refrigerant out of that gas. And then inside here is what? Inside that condenser.
Saturated mixture.
Yeah, exactly. You get your SSTs or SCTs or SDTs, depending on the manufacturer you're talking to. And then this point on the curve.
That's the dew.
So if this one's the dew point, which one would this be?
It's your bubble point.
Bubble point. So those of you that are looking at the screen right now, this is 407C. This is a replacement gas for R22. Now, I don't know if you guys ever went from R22 to 407C. R22 is a mineral oil system. You need to make sure you pull out all that oil and then replace it with POE oil. And Copeland, they say they want what does anybody know what the oil mixture they need? I shouldn't say the answer.
Is it POE?
For POE. So when you're pulling out mineral oil and you're putting POE and with a POE gas in. So R22 to 407C.
It's a really small number, isn't it? Isn't it like 95 to 5 or something like that?
100%. That's what they say. But some literature will say 90. It depends. I've read a lot of Copeland literature, but now they say 95.5. If you go into Bitzer, they'll say 90, I believe, to 10, or even 85 to 15, depending on the type of POE oil. But I go with 95.5. It's easiest. I remember I'd say it for all compressors. It makes it easier.
Now, do you flush both sides of the system with the R12 flush out?
I've used it before. I've definitely used it on smaller systems, but I don't know how valuable it was. Because I've blown out stuff with nitrogen before and blew out all the oil and then changed the unit and then did an oil test and the oil was fine, right? But you have to do that oil test.
Okay.
Right. What about you, Gary? Do you use that?
I've used it, the one product, RX11 Flush. I think I've used it twice. I don't like to use it because it's nasty. Like breathing that in, who the hell knows what it's doing to the inside of your body.
Yeah.
I don't like to use it for that instance, but the amount of crap that I've gotten out of a system after a plugged filter dryer, it's been incredible, the amount of stuff that came out. Now there's products on the market that you don't need to use a flush anymore. Supco and Hilmer both have one, where that you can send basically a foam pig down the line and blast it out with nitrogen, and you can use the flush with it, but you can use it without flush too, where it sends like a they call it a pig. They use this in the gas and oil industry too, where they flush out gas lines and all that kind of stuff, and it scrapes the entire pipe, and anything that's in there it catches and it shoots out. The only thing is, will the pig get caught? If it gets caught, you have to push it back the other way. But I've seen videos of this thing going through 90s and 45s and everything. So it's definitely an option rather than the chemical.
Yeah. You just need to do an oil test. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying that little gun thing just looks like an earplug, like a little styrofoam.
Yeah, it's like a piece of foam. I don't know what it's made out of, but it's like a high density piece of foam. And I haven't heard of any of them getting stuck. I've gotten a lot of feedback since I got the Supco one and made a couple of videos on it, and people have said, yeah, we used it and it worked really, really well. So I mean, just that's out there if you don't want to use chemical.
Okay, so this is our bubble point, on that left side of the enthalpy diagram. This is where you get that subcooling. So the further you push this outside your saturation curve, push it further from your bubble point, that's your subcoolant. And you need to use bubble point for subcoolant on Glide refrigerants. Just remember that. Then our next step, going through that metering device. Doesn't matter what metering, well, the TX valve, you got piston type, you got automatic, you got electronic. There's so many different types of metering devices. This case, you're taking it from that high pressure, high temperature liquid and reducing the pressure because it's flashing. So as it flashes through there, you get on the outlet, you get that liquid and vapor going into your evaporator. And then if you have a distributor, depending on the type of distributor, it could be orifice type distributor or a Venturi type distributor. I highly, highly recommend start learning how to size TX valves or TEVs, whatever you want to call them. It's so important. I relied on the wholesalers for many years to size my components, and I've trained many suppliers over the years now, and a lot of them were taught how to size it wrong or oversize the valves, oversize the TXVs. It's our job as technicians to understand the whole system. We should understand and know how to size a TX valve. I heard lots of people, that's not my job to size a TX valve. That's what the suppliers are for. That's what the wholesalers are for. No, that's what a refrigeration technician does. We are supposed to know how to size the equipment. So you need to understand that, because pressure drop when you're sizing a TX valve is very important. Want to add, Gary, anything to that?
I've never sized my own TX valve. If you have any literature on that, I'd love to see it, because I've never done it before. I've always been the guy that says, yeah, I'll let the supplier do it for me with the model and serial number of the machine. But if there's a way to do it out in the field, I would love to know.
Oh, yeah.
100% I would.
Oh, yeah. So Sporlan has a great, you can do it on their software. You can do it on Emerson software, Danfoss. It's super easy. You need the type of refrigerant. You need the condensing pressure or temperature you can use. You can use the suction pressure and temperature, and that gives you your pressure drop, your conditions. You also need to know your line size is good, not a big deal. Your liquid line temperature is so important. What happens if you have 100-degree Fahrenheit liquid coming into that TX valve and you drop it by 40 degrees? So instead of 100-degree liquid going into the TX valve, you have 40 degrees going into TX valve. Does that undersize the valve or does that oversize the valve? What do you think?
Undersized.
Okay, we've got one person that says undersized. So I'm taking 100-degree liquid and I'm dropping it down to 40-degree liquid going into the metering device, which is a TX valve or a TEV.
40.
This is good. I want someone to look it up on Google. I really, in my trainings, I don't mind, and I do a lot of courses and I give a lot of knowledge assessments and quizzes and stuff like that. I don't mind if people go and find the answer. I want them to do that. I don't like when they go and they call up their buddy to ask for the answer. When you look up the answer, you're learning. That's how you learn. But this is important to know because a lot of times when you go in to size a valve, the wholesaler or the supplier will ask you, well, what's your conditions? And when you ask the technician, a lot of times I didn't know. Well, I don't know what my liquid line would be, liquid line temperature. And this is more important, I would say, now when we talk about subcooling as well as talk about, refrigeration systems with subcooling loops. Because a lot of racks have subcoolers on them. So would that valve have less capacity or more capacity when you drop the liquid line temperature? One person said less capacity, I think. Because I didn't know this. While I was a technician. How about, is subcooling more efficient for a system or less efficient?
More subcooling, more efficient.
Yeah. 100%.
But isn't subcooling and superheat different when it comes to if it's a non-TXV or a TXV unit?
I didn't get that. Non-TXV to a TXV. Well, it's going to make a difference for sure. Because if you have just a cap tube or you're going to be
piston.
Yeah, piston. You've got a 25-degree subcooling or 30-degree subcooling. You don't have anything to stop that. Now with a TX valve, the valve's going to close off. That makes sense. So if you overcharge, let's say a capillary line, what's going to happen to your compressor? Capillary tube.
Flood?
Yeah, you're going to get liquid back to that compressor. Okay. So, anybody look it up and find the answer yet?
I'm just going to take a stab at it
Mhm.
because this is something that I've never actually thought about before.
Awesome.
So you said 100 degrees.
Yeah, it doesn't matter at 100 degrees, 90
Okay.
degrees.
Yeah,
liquid
whatever.
line.
Yeah, but we're talking like a massive drop in liquid line temperature going into the valve, right?
Yeah, so now you got subcooling. You have a subcooler loop in there in that unit. You got a plate, plate heat exchanger that's for subcooling to drop that. Would
Yeah,
that
so
TX valve be undersized or oversized? More capacity, less capacity. That's what I'm.
Well, you're gonna put, for lack of a better term, colder refrigerant into the evaporator because of the massive amount of subcooling.
Yeah.
That will cause your bulb to be colder to restrict less refrigerant. So if it's restricting refrigerant, then it's an undersized valve.
Okay. I like the way you were going with that.
But
colder
obviously I'm wrong because
Yes.
Now, wouldn't this be related to the amount of flash gas that you need to use to start boiling off the refrigerant on the suction side of that valve, Trevor?
So you could get flash gas, and this is something important when you're doing subcooling. That liquid line will have to be insulated.
No, I mean, so if you have 40-degree liquid going into the valve, the amount of flash gas needed to start the boiling process on the other side of the TX is going to be less than if you have 100-degree
Way less.
temperature. So then with colder liquid going to the TXV, you're now going to have to use less flash gas to start the boiling process. So you potentially oversized your valve.
Yeah. And this is the big thing that I've seen and I heard
That's
from
why
all the
he's the doctor.
manufacturers. Emerson, Sporlin, Danfoss, and the refrigeration application is that so many valves are oversized because if the subcooling, if they say, okay, we're just going to size it at 100, because that's standard in most of the calculators, and they just pick that, but they start running 70-degree subcooling and you size, just say a 1-ton valve. Now that valve could be 1.5 tons. If you go down to 40, it could be 2 or 3 tons. So it's just something to think about because I didn't know this stuff. And so if you ever run into issues and all of a sudden you install a valve and it has a subcooling circuit and you feel it's hunting all the time, it might be because the valve is oversized. Any questions on that? Good job, everyone. Okay, now the last part here. Going through, now we're back inside into the saturation point. We're inside the enthalpy curve, and now we're starting to boil. We're starting to boil. This temperature here, we're minus 50 in this drawing, right? So now we're boiling, we're absorbing heat out of the product, we're absorbing heat out of the people, whatever it is, and then we go back to the dew point, right? This is where we have gas. We want gas at the leaving the evaporator. But do we want the gas as close as possible to it or like way up in the evaporator? What's more efficient, if it's closer to the outlet or far away from the outlet? Having liquid.
You're going to be more efficient if you're using the entire evaporator. So if you have liquid down to maybe the last third of the evaporator compared to say at half, you're not using the entire capacity of your evaporator to cool the space. You're now losing efficiency.
Yeah, so if you can, you want to use as much, just like Matt said there, as much of that coil as possible. And this is what the manufacturers do in their design. And that's why they slap it on the side, like especially in the residential stuff. It's so easy just to follow what they say on the subcool and superheat. But those coils are designed for a specific superheat to flood that evaporator as much as possible, and then to make sure that you do not have any gas getting back to the compressor. That's why we have superheat. 6 degrees, 8 degrees, 10 degrees, 12 degrees, 15 degrees, whatever application it is. And then from here is that superheat, that compressor or system or total superheat that you have at that compressor. One thing I want to show you on this diagram, we talked about 407C, and I did get off topic about that mineral oil, the POE oil ratio, 95 POE to 5 mineral oil. Do you see this red line, these red line here is going on the angle? That is the temperature lines, just like I showed you when we talked about glide. And this line is the condenser line, and this is the evaporator line. Do you see how we're right at this point on this drawing? I'm going to draw it out for you because I think this is really important. That'll give you an idea of what's going on. So right at this point here, we'll say this is minus 50. Okay? Minus 50, close to that point right there. But we get to this line right here. If you guys can see, I'm using red. I should use a different color. It goes right up to here. This is minus 40. That's your glide. Did anybody see that? Maybe I'll change the color. Did you see that, Gary?
Yeah, I could see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have any comments on that? So it's warming up in the evaporator. Inlet of the evaporator here, minus 50. Outlet of the evaporator, minus 40. That's a 10-degree temperature increase. Same pressure though, because here's the pressure line across like that. Okay.
Yeah, so that's quite a bit of glide for the 407C, right?
Well, it may not be 10. It might be 8 on there. I was just doing it just on this diagram. I can't remember what it is, to be honest, but
Depending on manufacturers, a 407C or glide can be anywhere from 7 or 8 degrees up to 13 degrees from what I can recall.
well, see, so depending on the manufacturer of that specific refrigerant, because they change it a little bit. They put like 4% more of that one compared to the other one, so they don't, yeah, so they're a bit different. Okay, we're gonna go through this. We're at 9:30 already, man. I love talking, Gary. Love talking.
Talk less. Just kidding.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go through this, and I think this is the last slide we'll get through. What are the checkpoints you would do on a system like this? What are your checkpoint review? You can unmute yourself. Look, I'll give you one. Suction pressure.
Yeah, if I was checking the system, you know, I mean, you would want to just check basic pressure, superheat, and subcooling to kind of get like a overview of the whole system operating, right? And of course, as Gary mentioned earlier, how important the discharge line is.
Yeah.
Yeah, across dryers as well. You have a suction dryer and a liquid dryer there.
So this is not all the checkpoints. This is a basic. As you can see, it's a basic setup. We got 2 dryers in here. This one's the liquid dryer. What is this dryer here? What do you think this one's for? Suction. What's the suction dryer for?
To clean up the system. Maybe a compressor went bad recently or something of that sort.
Yeah. Burnout. Should they stay in the system there, Gary?
So a lot of people say no. So I've heard some manufacturers say yes. I actually had a podcast with Sporlin about 4 years ago with Henry Papa, and he said you can leave them in.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, no, you can't. It really depends on the pressure difference across it. Like you gotta watch it.
Yep.
I mean, if that pressure difference starts to climb, then yeah, you have to change it. And some of them, I mean, they're the replaceable type style filter dryers, right?
Yep.
Where you can't really, you're not going to cut the whole shell out. You'll probably go back and put a new core in to keep that system nice and clean. But like I said, it really depends on the pressure difference across it.
100%.
Yeah.
So you'll look at all the compressor manufacturers, and they're going to say, okay, if it's a new install or a temporary install, how long they want it in there. If it's a permanent install, some of them will give you the pressure drop on the older refrigerant, like R22, 502, and stuff, things like that. At the end of the day, if there's no pressure drop, there's really nothing wrong with it. I recommend pulling it out. I recommend pulling it out because if it does plug up, then you could lose another compressor. Because now we have, what happens if that starts to plug up? What are we worried about if it plugs up?
Oh, your compression ratio is going to skyrocket.
Yes.
So on suction filter dryers, like what Gary was saying, where they're actually accessible and you can have a removable core, on some pool applications, pool dehumidification applications I've worked on, we'll change out the desiccant core with actually a cardboard, like paper core.
Yeah.
Afterwards. And then you still need to monitor the paper core moving forward.
Exactly. And what is that core? So it's felt, I think they call it pleated filters.
Yeah, a pleated filter core. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the purpose of that? Why do you think they go to that?
There's the pleated filter core, you're still going to actually capture any additional debris within the system.
Yeah.
But there's going to be a greater pressure drop across a desiccant core than just a pleated filter core.
Yeah, for sure. So, and this is a thing that I've talked about with many technicians, would be like, well, we got to go with the pleated filter. And then other technicians are like, no, we don't go with any filter. So depending on who you talk to, and manufacturers, some will say, okay, leave those pleated in. And some will say, no, after you do the cleanup, after you run the system for 72, 48, 3 months, whatever it is, pull those pleated filters out. So there's no set in stone on that, but they are to protect any copper debris or anything that'll come back and potentially damage the compressor.
Now, is there a reason why I only ever see suction filters on larger units and not smaller units? Is it just because of tonnage?
No, I wouldn't think so. I think maybe cost. Like at the end of the day, when you're changing a suction filter dryer, you have a burnout, like it's our electrical failure, really what it's called, and you put that suction filter dryer in to protect from that. Now, when we talk about a larger application like chillers or racks or parallel rack application, they put them in there to protect any debris, and it's usually a pleated filter, any copper debris coming back to get into that compressor.
Okay, because I'm in commercial, so I'm just wondering, like, when I go to like I look at pool pack units and I see suction dryers on there, and I look at chillers at hospitals and I see suction dryers on there, but when I go to like basically just your typical rooftop, I see no suction dryers. All I see is liquid dryers.
You
Like,
want
I'm
you want the easiest answer for that? So if you're working on a 100-ton chiller, how much does that compressor cost?
too much money that I could buy a
And
new
and
house.
and basically the suction dryer is a very cheap piece of insurance. And if you're talking about a 5-ton rooftop, the compressor's only $700. I mean, there's some ideology behind that right there.
And there's some manufacturers now not even putting in liquid line filter dryers. And so you just gotta watch out there. What happens if you use a suction dryer on the liquid side? That's a good question. What would happen? What do you think would happen? I never have been asked that question. That's a good one.
Yeah, maybe we should put one in and see what happens. Well, suction dryers you don't need as much pressure to overcome them. So I really don't think there's going to be a heck of a lot that happens, to be honest with
Me
you.
neither. It's the material. It's a bit different material because you're trying to pull any acids out. You're trying to clean it up. Oh, and depending on the suction dryer, because there's many different ones. There's some that pull out wax. There's some that pull out acid, and there's some just to pull out moisture. So it depends on that dryer that's put in there. So checkpoint review. I'm going to go through this quick because we're suction pressure, suction temperature, discharge pressure, discharge temperature, condenser air in, condenser air out. Your subcooling. So that's your liquid temperature, your liquid pressure, and then you do your conversion. Your temperature in, temperature out of that filter dryer, your liquid line filter dryer. So we want to see if that's plugging. You want to look in the sight glass. So important if you have a sight glass to look in it, because what does it tell you? What's the whole point of a sight glass? The main purpose of a sight glass?
Wet or dry?
That's it. You have moisture in the system. Okay, and then the second purpose is to see if you're low on gas. But I've looked in sight glasses before where they look like they were full, but they were empty. So that's why you got to use your temperature probes and your gauges and stuff. Always be using your tools. And you guys got so many cool tools out there. I see Gary all the time putting videos up with these super cool tools. I didn't have them. They weren't around really when I was in the field. I've been out of the field now for, I don't know, 8 years. They might have been, but it wasn't something with digital gauges. We didn't talk about that. They weren't really Bluetooth stuff. Wasn't happening. Now, that stuff is you need to save your money. If you're a technician, I started out, I didn't have money. I couldn't buy tools. I was going to Canadian Tire and Home Depot and buying tools, get started. But after I got money, I started buying good tools. And you need the tools to do your job efficiently and effectively.
And if I could throw in, if you're going to invest in something digital, I would invest in probes over digital gauges if you can't, just because you can always use a set of analog gauges, but the probes are very good for service calls. They're very good for maintenance. They're very good to diagnose a system, where gauges come in handy for charging and stuff like that. But you can always do that with analog if you don't. I mean, if affordability is a factor, if you can only drop money on one or the other, I would go with probes, because I use my probes probably, I don't know, when I have to gauge up, probably 90% of the time.
Oh yeah, I believe it. I talk to technicians. They rarely pull gauges out. They don't. Why do you need to pull them out? Unless you have to pull the gas. unless you have a massive leak or something. But for service side, and like Gary said, if you only can afford analog right now, or you got used tools, you bought used tools, that's fine. But we do make money. You have to invest in yourself. It's just like education. All the time, you got to invest in your education. Same with tools, and you do your job more effectively. So if you can, get the subcooling on the inlet of the metering device or the TX valve, or at least the temperature on the inlet. Air in, air out of the evaporator, and then you get your superheat. Pressure drop across that suction filter dryer, and then the compressor or system superheat. And on smaller systems, this doesn't take a long time to do. And even on larger systems, it doesn't take that long to do. The only thing is that you may have to walk up on the roof, and I worked on this, and walk across the roof, and it takes 15 minutes to get to the condensing unit. That's why it's super important to have these, like if you can have digital gauges, Bluetooth gauges, because now you can go put them on the condensing unit up top, you come back down into the evaporator, you see what's going on there, and you understand what's going on the roof at the same time as you're in the evaporator. Because if that condenser fan, like we talked about fan cycling earlier, is banging on and banging off, that's going to change your liquid pressure, and you're going to see it on your gauge, your probe. So, anyone want to add anything to these checkpoints?
No, I do have a question on those Bluetooth probes. Are they quick release? Like when you screw it off, is it?
No, there's not like a quick connect, but they hold very, very little charge, very, very little. But if you're worried about taking it off the liquid line or something like that, you can get these gas retention valves that are pretty cool. Yellow Jacket makes them. I think anybody, JB, anybody that does refrigeration piping tools probably makes them. Basically, you screw it on to the system, then you put your probe on the gas retention valve, and there's a little valve that you turn, and it pushes down the Schrader core. And then when you're done, you pull it back, take your probe off, and then you can take the gas retention valve off.
I've seen those, and I've been tempted to buy it, but I never know if my boss was going to allow me to buy that type of stuff.
Even staying away from gas retention valves, you could just go to check adapters that are short radius, like short in length, and put those onto your probes. Those work really well as in the same purpose as a gas retention.
Okay.
Another thing that we don't think about as technicians, if you're using, we're working with a lot of different refrigerants now. And if you're using the same gauge on all these different refrigerants, you're going to get a little bit of dirt or a little bit of oil sometimes. And if you don't clean these gauges and set them up, you got to take care of your tools. Gary has a ton of videos on that. You need to go check out some of his stuff on the digital probes, on the gauges and stuff.
Now, is it as simple as just pulling a vacuum on your gauges and then just opening them up to clean them out?
No.
I'm not sure. That's a Gary question.
You'd have to talk to the manufacturer, because I mean, it's for like micron gauges, for example. Some of them have different types of alcohol that they want you to use on the, and basically a couple of drops of alcohol, you kind of wiggle it around a bit, let it dry out, and then pull a vacuum on it, and that usually fixes the problem. But I know Yellow Jacket, it was mineral spirits they wanted used on their micron gauge, and not alcohol. So I would reach out to the manufacturer and find out what they want you to use to clean it, because you don't want to use something that's going to damage the gauge.
Okay.
I don't know if you can share my screen, but I have one of those gas retention tools in my hand. So.
Oh yeah, I can see you, Donald.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you attach that end to your system port, put your gauge or your probe on this end here on the side port, and then your thumb screw here is what actually depresses your needle. And then before you go to disconnect, you backseat your thumb screw so that your Schrader core is no longer depressed.
Cool. Thanks
One
for
thing I
that.
can say about those gas retention valves is be careful with the thumb screw. Sometimes the area that's supposed to come down on the Schrader comes down on the side, and they have bent Schrader pins.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are some checkpoints important to do. They don't take long to do, but it's important as technicians to get these, right? And start understanding doing temperatures, you know, talking about temperatures, condensing temperature, evaporated temperature, so important, discharge temperature, suction temperature, liquid line temperature. And it's going to make it easier over time when you start talking in that way because there are so many refrigerants. Mobile apps. I'm going to get through this real quick. You got to get HVAC Know It All app. You got to be on there. Emerson AE Bulletins app. This is where you get all the Emerson information. You need to have this app if you work on any Copeland's or any Emerson stuff. Bits or BSWAT. If you're working on bits or stuff, you need this one here. This is where all their information is. 2-stage compressors, their octagon compressors, CO2 compressor, Danfoss ref tools. If you don't have that one, I'm not sure what you're using for like PT charts, but I think this one's one of the best ones.
It's the best PT chart in the industry, that one.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Which one was that?
Danfoss Ref Tools. It's got like 5 different apps in one, but if you're
Yeah.
looking, the refrigerant slider is the best refrigerant PT chart
Okay.
in the industry, hands down.
Yeah, I love it. And then it got a troubleshooting app inside there, so you can put in some information. And you can start troubleshooting systems. Like it's, yeah. Copeland Mobile. If you work on any Copeland compressor, and if you don't have this, I'm not sure where you've been the last few years. Maybe you're new to the industry. But anyone that's in 5 or 6 years in the industry and you work on Copeland, you need this app because it gives you all the information about Copeland's. HVAC School, Tech for Techs, ton of content there, podcasts, lots of great videos, check it out. And one that I learned recently, Tecumseh Tech Tools. And I reviewed it, I just downloaded it recently. I haven't worked really, I might have worked on a lot of Tecumseh back in the day, but I just don't remember. Because I did work on a lot of Bitzer and I didn't even know until I started going through my old phones and found all my old pictures. And I'm like, wow, I worked on all these different things. I just didn't remember all of it. But this is a pretty good app if you're working on Tecumseh. And there's a lot of different apps inside that one too. A lot of like different features. Cool. Educational resources. All the ones that I've talked about already, but once again, get into HVAC Know It All. If you're not already, go check out his content. HVACR videos, if you're in your commercial refrigeration. Dick Wirtz, if you're an HVAC technician trying to get into commercial refrigeration, this book right here, it's golden for you. I have one right here. I've went through it many times. There's examples in there. There's so many great things because underneath my computer right now, I got the modern refrigeration books. It's holding up it's holding my computer up to be a little bit higher. And I got 2 editions there, and that's what I learned on. But it's this thick. It's that thick.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
so
good.
the commercial
Great
refrigeration
book.
one's a couple hundred pages. So there's lots of great information on it. So big words. And you can get the 3rd edition if the 4th edition is too expensive. If you're looking for CO2 information, r744.com, and then Toolshed. These guys, super awesome dudes. Eddie and Jerry. Check them out on YouTube. All about, you know, like leadership as technicians, how to communicate to the customer. These things, these soft skills are the hard skills, but they're the most important skills. What do you think about that, Gary?
Soft skills are super important. If you can't relate or relay information to a customer properly and they don't understand what you're talking about, or if you come off rude or your communication is not up to par, then you will have a lack of work in the industry, because if they don't understand what you're telling them, they're not going to okay your job or whatever you're presenting to them. So soft skills, yes, 100%.
Yeah. And you work, I'm going to shoot a polling question in there, but you work with the customer, build a relationship with them, and you'll have work with them all the time. They'll just want to keep hiring your company just because of you, if you build a good relationship with them. And when times are slow and you have like a list of stuff that you need to do and you have a good relationship, they'll be like, okay, come in and do this work. I've seen it countless times. And then if you're rude to them or you don't help explain stuff to them and be honest with them and upfront with them, then you're going to have a tough time, just like Gary said.
Take it back to grade 4 and basically pretend you're in grade 4 and do a show and tell with the customer. That's what I do. I take physical parts to my customer and go, look, this is why I'm changing it, or this is why I changed it afterwards. So they know and they get that trust factor going. And if I can't show them the physical part, I'll take a video or a picture or something just as evidence, not because they don't trust me, but just so I get that edge, that little bit of an edge, right? This is why we're doing it. This is why we did it. And this is why we'll do it again the next time it happens. And then when you get into that groove, it's much easier to build that relationship over time.
Yeah. I just threw out a polling question there, Gary. How much time do you invest in learning and developing each week? 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week, 4 hours a week,
Damn,
5 hours a
too
week?
much.
Well, that's a loaded question. If you're sitting on a roof trying to decipher why your unit's not working, I mean, I could be learning 20 hours a week.
All right, say outside of your 40-hour week.
Yeah, outside your being on the roof or on a equipment, because that is a type of learning, but sometimes you're not learning doing, you know what I mean? So outside, like Gary said, outside of your work hours, how much time are you investing in? And this is where we take average technicians, good technicians, and great technicians, separate them. Because when I started out the first 6 years, I was investing a lot of time on the job learning, but I only started really learning when I started learning outside.
Well, as long as HVAC Know It All keeps putting out good content, I'll keep learning every single day of my life.
Yeah. Yeah, you will.
No pressure there, Gary.
Hey, my content is basically a blog of what I'm learning. So basically I'm just sharing what I've learned that day or that week or whatever. So it's basically I'm learning with you guys. I'm just sharing it after I've learned it.
So I'm going to just share the poll right now, share results. So 9 of you out of the 21, 9 of you out of the 21 did 1 to 2 hours. You want to be a great technician, you got to step that up. I'll be honest with you right now. And I know you got family time and you got friend time. Yeah, you got, your personal time, because you need time to yourself. But this is your career. If you want to crush it out there to be the best technician at your company, you got to invest more than 1 to 2 hours a week outside of work. Even if you work a 60-hour week, you still got time to put in the hours to learn. Because I put in more than 60 hours of work a week now. I work more now than I ever did before, and I love it. But I'm still reading this book here, like this. Oh, you can't see it. That book there, the Dick Worth book. I read it. I pick it up each week and just review stuff that I already know, because I forget stuff. There's so much to learn about HVAC and refrigeration. So try to get this week. If you put 1 hour, if you only put 1 hour down, I want you to do next week 1.5 hours. That's it. There's over 150 hours in a week. I can't remember how many it is. 172.
If they're still here, they've already spent 2. So
yeah. So there you bang. Yeah, exactly. It is 2. That's awesome.
Let's hammer home a point that I heard in a podcast by I don't know, some mentor guy. Please start reading.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like it, please start reading.
Yeah. Because I didn't like reading. 3 years ago, that's really when I started reading. I read lots of manuals. I think I read 2 biographies, maybe 3. My wife bought me while we were traveling around the world, and I read them because they were about, I think one was Anthony Kiedis, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Slash, Guns N' Roses one. But really, I wasn't reading anything. And about 3 years ago, I started reading and totally changed my mindset. And I know Matt reads all the time, and it's hard. It's hard.
Well, yeah, and the other thing too is you've brought this up to me, Trevor. I'm gonna get going in a minute too, because I gotta still take out all the garbage for tonight. But motivational, anywhere you guys can find motivational speakers. A few years ago, I listened to a bunch of Tony Robbins videos. Then I got on to Gary V, and anybody that's uplifting, positive, and just can provide you motivation, it does so much for your spirit, like 100%. It's uplifting to listen to that kind of stuff on your drives to work or whatever you're doing, right? It's just really gives a positive outlook on everything you're doing.
Yeah. And it's whoever relates to you, right? Whoever relates to you. So check out HVACknowitall.com, check out refrigerationmentor.com. In the forums here, I'm going to throw it in the chat. If you do want to do let me see if I can get this. If you do want to do a little quiz, I built a little one for everybody. I'll put it in the chat. You can do it if you want. Control to everyone. Bam, it's in the chat there. I want to thank everybody for taking the time here on the Zoom call. I want to thank Gary. Dude, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah,
I know
no
we doubled the time. we were 55 minutes over. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and all of you on Instagram Live, thank you for taking the time. Check out that forum. Gary, we'll have to do something like this again. We'll mix it up.
Awesome. Yeah, man. Just let me know.
Awesome. Okay, everyone.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks everybody for coming in.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I got to get going, Trevor. So thanks, man. I appreciate the invite.
See you later, brother.
Take it easy, everyone. Bye.